Welcome to Design Your Destiny, your podcast for tapping into the power of your subconscious mind. In this next few minutes, allow me to show you how to tap into that power so that you can create success with ease, form deeper connections, and have greater presence in your relationships, and most importantly, find peace within yourself. My name is Penny Chason, and I'm your host. Hey, joyful souls. It is time for another episode of Design Your Destiny, and I want to expound a little bit upon last week's episode where I was talking about how you can't become who you want to be by being who you are today. Because I've talked about comfort zones, I've talked about growth. I don't believe I've ever mentioned specifically about identity. But when we shed an old identity to step into a new way of being, that can be emotional. It can be uncomfortable. We can even feel out of sorts, almost as if we're not grounded. And it's because as we step into a new identity, we experience a level of uncertainty subconsciously. And when we experience that uncertainty, that there's brain chemicals that get released that basically are similar to fight or flight. You get some adrenaline type release, and it can cause you to feel as though you're having moments of feeling anxious. You might feel fearful. At least that's the way it feels in your body. Okay? It's the way it feels physically in your body. But you're recognizing that you don't have anything to be afraid of. So you don't understand what's causing you to feel that way. And what's happening is that your brain is creating new neural pathways and using the experiences that you're having to define your new reality as you're stepping into it. Our brain uses patterns to determine what it needs to respond to and what it should react to. And maybe that's really not the best way to describe it, but think of it this way. When you're born, your brain is a blank slate, la tabla rasa. And then every experience you have, your brain makes a record of it. And when it makes a record of what's happening, it's things like, okay, I'm hungry, I cry, I get fed. I'm hungry, I cry, I get fed. So it begins to lay down this pattern of, oh, when I physically feel hungry inside, if I cry, I know I'm going to get fed. And this pattern establishes a basis for a sense of safety and security within our mind. Now, that's very basic. But the same thing is happening. When you're in your comfort zone, you are repeating a pattern that your brain knows is safe and secure, and your needs are being met, and our ego's not being wounded, and, everything is right and perfect in life. We don't have to react to things. It's just smooth sailing. And then we decide to do something new and different. And when we step into that, we begin to feel uncomfortable. And when you fully step into that and you have fully let go of that old identity and step into a new identity, typically when that happens, we're changing more than one thing. We're changing a lot of things. So our mind is actually expending energy to catch up as it is processing these new ways of being, these things that you're doing, the things that you're saying, people's reactions. Are you safe in doing this? Or are you not safe in doing this? For example, when someone decides to walk away from their 9 to 5 and step into owning a business, this is a pattern that repeats I see it all the time in the entrepreneur groups I'm in. Someone has been in a 9 to 5 their whole life, and now they're walking away and starting a business. There is a huge identity shift subconsciously when you go from knowing that if you show up and you punch the clock and you put in the hours that the direct deposit is going into the bank account, to having your business and knowing that the income generated is wholly a result of the efforts that you put into that business. So it's not just about a responsibility to show up and punch a clock. It's responsibility for the whole thing. Another example would be, say money is not an issue. Say someone is, quite comfortable and their spouse works and money's not an issue, but they have decided to walk away from their career as an architect and become a full-time artist because art was always their passion, but they went into architecture because from the point of view of their family, their parents, and society, that was an acceptable way to express your artistic talents, right? Because you get a paycheck for that. I know people who would argue with the identity of starving artist. That's simply a chosen identity to call yourself a starving artist, but it's an identity and a belief that is commonly held by the public at large. So that's something that can hold people back from doing what it is that they love. So there may be some degree of, feeling these emotions around the up level that have to do with, what's going to happen with approval from others. So your mind has to go through this whole process of knowing or identifying whether or not, you're still getting the same responses from family. There are just as many different beliefs about the different types of careers and lifestyles and whether someone chooses to be a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad or a corporate housewife or, a farmer, an artist, a singer, an actor. We allow ourselves to get so wrapped up that sometimes when we change that identity, it's that creates the discomfort because our brain has created this reality around society's perceptions and what the brain perceives to be safe and secure. So if you're stepping out of an old identity and into a new identity and you feel emotional, things are changing. Maybe you find that as you grow spiritually, because I know a lot of you who listen are on a spiritual path in terms of learning to be at peace, letting go of judgment, to allow things to happen, to not need to control. That spiritual growth happens in stages. And when you go into a new stage of who you are spiritually, there may be times when you find that you're no longer on the same path as other people who are in your life. And in order to continue your own growth, you may decide that it's time to take a step back from an old lifestyle, from old friendships. And it can be pretty uncomfortable. Sometimes it's almost as if can be a little bit of a grieving process, right? Because, we love people, we care about people, but sometimes we need to, and I say we collectively, we need to decide when it's time to move on. And if you're listening to this podcast, then most likely you're someone who cares deeply about what other people think and experience, while at the same time recognizing you are not responsible for their experiences. And that is a lesson that I think is one that's continuous, throughout life, especially considering how we bring all of our humanness and everything that we've been indoctrinated with in our entire lives from our childhood into adulthood. There are a lot of things to unlearn. And wow, this really was not where I expected this this chat with you to go into the spirituality. But I have to tell you, even though I know that originally when this podcast started, it was geared towards entrepreneurs, there's very much a spiritual component to it. And I know that a lot of you who listen are spiritual. And when we go through what some refer to as a spiritual upleveling, or once we go through a process of we recognize, oh my gosh, you might have realized, wow, I did not notice that I was still hanging on to this old part of me. And this is what's keeping me from experiencing what I want to experience. And then when you allow that to fall away, it can be emotional as we're creating new context for our lives, as we're creating a vision of how it is we're here to show up and impact. So very much just as business, if you're on a spiritual path, things get uncomfortable. There's a wobble. There's a little up and down. And this becomes pertinent a lot of times for the people that I work with, because in doing the work, I really work with my clients on identity. They may say, well, I'm looking for more confidence. I want to trust myself. And I really dig into, well, who are you going to be? When you have this, who are you going to be? What are you going to think? How does that feel? And we build it out from there. And once they recognize those truths about themselves, they can sometimes, have a little bit of emotional upheaval. And it's not necessarily about the work that we're doing, but it's around recognizing who they were, who they're becoming, and their choice to maybe set boundaries, their choice to give themselves permission to be heard no matter what it is they have to say. That maybe someone else might judge them for what they have to say, but what they have to say is so important that now they're stepping into doing that. That is an identity uplevel. That's an identity shift. And it circles right back around to being uncomfortable. The bottom line is, if you want to be comfortable always, stay in your status quo. Don't change a thing. Just stay where you are. If you're ready to grow your life, to shift your life, to change your life, and to accept that it may not always feel easy, it may not always look easy, and that as you grow as a person, you may find yourself feeling your feelings. If you're okay with that, well then, you know what? There are lots more people out there just like you. Maybe some of these examples resonated with you. Maybe you've never experienced this before. Maybe you experience it all the time because you're constantly growing. Either way, I would love to know what you found useful in this episode. You can do that by messaging me on Facebook, Instagram, hitting reply on an email that you receive from me. I'm always interested to hear what you're up to, what you're thinking, and what you're doing. Bye now. Thank you for listening today. If you've enjoyed this episode of Design Your Destiny, I would appreciate it if you would head over to iTunes and leave a positive review. When you leave a positive review, it's like podcast currency, and we can increase our reach and get the message to even more people that they, just like you, have the ability to design their destiny. And remember, subscribe on your favorite podcast platform.